There is no wilderness in Ireland. Our mountain landscape has been worked by humans for many thousands of years, and none more so than the Cooleys. The human record is visible throughout the mountains. Great burial cairns on the summits, ancient crop bridges and ring forts on the lower slopes, ruins of booley huts in the river glens. Through the turf fields and the forests we can follow the stone walls built as relief works in the Great Famine, and occasionally we can find the lazy beds where people grew potatoes and corn. The mountains bear other, less tangible traces of human activity. The generations who walked and worked these hills described and named the places they use, creating a rich landscape of place names.
An Céide, an Strabra, an Anna-War.
These names, in English and in the local dialect of Irish, are still used by sheep farmers who graze the slopes.
Well, bhí a réalaigh an amé mar a bhíoch a réalaigh an atsacha eile gan dí luige agus mar a bhíoch si gan dí a dún agus a gan dí ardwacha chomáid. Canhain se le a bhí an seo gaalaigh a réala mar a dearmad a séla linne seo nó gaalaigh dheis ceart álu.
They also tell the story of the mountains, giving us a glimpse into how our forebears used and understood these places.
People have been using the mountains for over 5,000 years for a wide variety of activities, from burying their dead in the case of the great Neolithic passage tombs off Claremont and Kernawadi, to grazing animals, which has been a hugely important activity through the millennia, to hunting, to cutting turf, and of course as a routeway across the mountains. Place names are really key to understanding how people have made meaning in this landscape. They're sort of like a communally made mental map of the mountains. They point out important resources and places, so for example good grazing lands, good places for cutting turf, streams, boundaries, all the places that people found most important on the mountains.
In the 19th century, the herring fisheries were thriving in Carlingford Lough, employing more than 200 fishermen in Omeath alone. The shortest route to market in Dundalk was over the mountains. Young girls and women carried fish wrapped in seaweed in creels, 2 stone apiece strapped to their backs.
The inhabitants of this district eke out their subsistence by hawking fish through the country, and are greatly looked down upon by their neighbours, who say that the Omeath men are no better than peddlers and cadgers.
They were known as Cadgers, a Middle English word for peddlers, and the route they took is still called the Cadgers Pad. From Angara Ur, they climbed the southern flank of Tulladglen, crossing Da Owen and turning sharply above Mary Sluin, where the steep zigzag path on the Mollywee took them on to Omarafada. It took more than an hour to climb to the ridge. In a shelter dipped by a stream, there is a large flat rock where they rested. Sometimes they played a game of cards there. This is Cluck Immerth and Agarty. But one day, when someone dealt the ace of spades, the devil appeared out of the mist on Omarafada, and no more cards were played on the rock. The herring fisheries declined from about 1870 onwards. There is just one photograph of an Omeath herring girl. This is Annie Flynn, the last cadger. The route remained important to Omeath long into the 20th century, for driving cattle to the fair or for selling of all kinds. The last Irish speaker, Annie O'Hanlon, told what it meant to her.
It wasn't unusual in the old times, when I was young, for a woman or a girl to throw a bag of hens on her back and walk from here to Dundalk, over the mountain, out the Cadgers Pad to sell them. That would be at Christmas time. That was common.
Before there was silage, before modern haymaking, there was bullying. Moving all the cattle and a lot of the people to mountain pastures for several months every summer. The importance of bullying is shown by all the place names referring to grass and grazing.
And Lena Moore.
The Lenny Moor comes from Lena, meaning a grassy place, and there are many versions in the Cooleys.
And Monchus and Lena Keel.
The main bullying site for Omeath was in Tulla-Glen.
This is what we call a Mary. It's Mary Tanamuck. This is where people would have came, young people mostly would have came and lived here from May to September, minding cattle on the hills. There's various Marys here, various place names in this area. When I was collecting the place names of the local people, they were telling me about Mary Tanamuck, Mary Dowie, Mary Sloan, Mary Uchtnacriddy.
Every spring, the walls of the Bully hut were built up again, and the hut was roofed with scraws, topsods of heather cut from the mountainside. The door opening in a Bully always faces south or southeast for light, because there were no window openings. Before the famine, there might have been 100 or more people here at midsummer, and a few hundred livestock. The cattle were penned close to the Bully at night for milking, but during the day the young people drove them high onto the ridges to graze.
When I was collecting the place names in this area, I realised that there was the last of the dialect, the Irish Gaelic dialect, was still alive in the place names in these hills.
Bhar daoine aró a Gaelic seo acu ro an Chanamann seo acu a gantar a mé. Stoilamsa an dayan is láidir an dayan Jerry den Gaelic an ur-iescart alú agus an urtha na héireann. Bhí daoine costal Annabani Anluan, Pedro Slúan agus mar sin de daoine aró a Gaelic acu is na seascatí agus fiúins na seachtatí agus beidir go daoine aró árainn acu in a dhéisian.
It was bullying which gave the Cooley Mountains so many Gaelic place names.
Canawan Charlie a bhí an rubba costal le Gaelic Vannan, rubba costal le Gaelic Hir Chonal mar a taisi iniu. Stoilam sa an rud a suntasi fan Canawan seo na an focal ha. Sé sin an áit ní rómé agus níl mé mar a óla mítir a scoil aniu Gerardini ha rómé, ha néil mé agus mar sinde agus scarabé sin ceanna na treiche is láidir agus is suntasi a bhíú in san Canawan.
Women and girls played a prominent role in the Bully, milking and churning butter for sale. The men and boys were tending crops on the lowland farms, or fishing, or on the tramp for work on the big farms north or south.
That wooded area is Trumpet Hill. Cuchulainn had his camp down at the base of the hill.
The first and greatest story told in Ireland was on Tonbo Cooley, the cattle raid of Cooley. It's a true epic, a fictional story of a search for the Brown Bull of Cooley, but it is probably based on some real events that happened 2,000 years ago.
And behind the hill on the shore, Queen Maeve's army was camped down by Ballurgan. Every morning, Cuchulainn sent his trumpeter to the top of the hill to blow out a challenge to the Connaught men to send out a champion to fight him. And every day at noon, they met at the ford on the Flurry River at Ballymascanlon in single combat. Just over the hill there is the Ballymakellet River, and there's a deep gorge on it that we call Undhu Cora, the Black Cauldron. That's where the Cooley men hid the bull from Queen Maeve and the armies of Connaught. But when all the fighting in Glen Moore was over, the Connaught men found the bull quietly grazing with its heifers up there at the Bronze Age fort of Lissachigan.
This valley has many layers of human traces. Lissachigan was already old when Queen Maeve's armies came through. The name means Fort of the Rye, and rye may have been one of the crops grown on ancient ridges, very like lazy beds, that are under the heather and sometimes under turf. Archaeologists have found traces of early medieval occupation, and there is some evidence that 18th century Rapparees or rebels moulded musket balls here. In recent centuries, the Booley huts were built using remains of Bronze Age huts. The patches of bright green on the Booley sites across the slopes up towards Carnawaddy are the result of centuries of cow dung. Like neighbouring townlands in Omeath, Glen Moore was a functioning Gaeltacht into the 20th century.
We're here in Cronk-na-Mona, and this used to be known as O'Neillsville, because at one stage there was at least 7 O'Neill names in this area. And the Glen Moore surnames came from Armagh, Cavan and Tyrone, and the names being McGeown, Donnelly, O'Neills, O'Hanlons, Toners, O'Rourke's, Rooney's, McCann's, and my own maiden name, O'Reilly.
Glen Moore was part of the estate acquired by Elizabethan adventurer Nicholas Bagnall, but early estate papers list no residence. It seems to have been used mainly for bullion by lowland farmers until the mid-17th century, when people, dispossessed by war and plantation to the north, began to arrive. These were the people who put names on the mountain pastures.
In the 1800s, all of the Glen Moore people would have spoken Irish, but by 1900, the only people who spoke Irish were those from birth. And the last native speaker here was Nancy O'Neill, who died in 1932.
Ar a drochúr hart fan bblion 87 hoisi an maith seo ar a Gaeilge ní dóilam sa gur tógú aon pháistí leis a Gaeilge an amé in a dhéisin agus nuair nach dógtar pháistí le canhain a heiliú cílíonn sé sin go dosníonn si a fáil bháis. Agus gígaró seannaí ní beidir a buint úsáid as an Gaeilge go léithúil go dtí na 1950 agus na 1930 níró a Gaeilge a Lord mar hanga phobal a heiliú agus níró si a Lord le páistí a heiliú agus de réir chéile fuair si bás.
This area is known as the Monchus, and you can see the old stone walls here. These are old homesteads where people lived a couple of hundred years ago, And an old man told me that he heard that there was 40 families over here. And they would have worked this land. You can see the ridges down there, and there's more ridges over there. And they would have worked this land and grew potatoes.
At the time of the famine, the largest landowner in County Louth was Thomas Fortescue of Ravensdale, later Lord Claremont, who held over 23,000 acres. He wanted to clear the Monchus for grazing. 60 years ago, folklore collectors heard how he got rid of the tenants.
There were 40 families here before the famine, but the landlord claimed them off to raise bullocks on it. Lord Claremont put the people out. It was him surely. He put them out in this way. He gave them £1 and paid their fare to America. Neil McGeown was the last to leave the Monchus. I heard him a saying. McGeown used to say, after he was put out, I left me mountain, me lime and me land, all to be obedient to your honour.
It's great to see that, you know, that they're still here, these old walls, a couple of 100 years on. And it was great that they weren't bulldozed away, and it'd be a shame if anything ever happened to them, you know. And they're a reminder to us all of our people that went before us, and we should never forget them, you know. The Lord have mercy on them all.
Is rud anhabhachtach ar nairacht agus is bralom a hekel go bhfuil sim mór ag na daoine a cónaíonn sa ceantar seo, sa Cooley, sa tíordrach, sa Stair, sa ceantar, agus sa lóg anamnacha a bhfuil in úsad go fáil leis na fearmóirí. Is rud íontach a hekel go bhfuil an tógra aireachta seo deanta ag an daoine seo, agus tá súlagan go bhfuil go méid siad ag dul go bra go tochi.
These place names have a story to tell. It's the story of the men and the women who dug the land and they carried fish, the milk cows, the churned butter and the built the famine walls. They were our ancestors and they've left a legacy in the place names. We should treasure that legacy, not for their sake, but for our own, because it's our story and it makes us who we are.